there enough evidence to indict John and Patsy Ramsey? Based on the evidence you were presented, do you feel you know who killed JonBenet Ramsey?
I highly suspect I do.
So this is really it. The grand jurors heard the evidence. They rejected the intruder theory. They said they thought Patsy wrote the note. And they also seemed to suspect that there were two perpetrators. So who did the grand jurors think killed JonBenet?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Thank you very much for the many birthday wishes. Thank you also for the very many contributions from you guys. Really do appreciate it. Timmy also says thank you. Get ready for a very bumper show today. This is also going to be an episode that you will likely remember. 5 years before Jonathan Webb showed his face on an ABC 2020 special called The List, and just 3 years after the indictments were finally revealed, Jonathan Webb gave an anonymous interview where both his face and his voice were hidden and or disguised. In that 2016 interview, for the first time ever, a grand juror was asked A, if he thought he knew who killed JonBenet, and B, who that suspect was. In other words, the Ace of Diamonds. Remember, in September 2016, JonBenet's brother broke his silence for the first time in 20 years. It was his first interview in 20 years, and he did that to preemptively refute all manner of allegations against him, whether he was awake or not, whether he had high-tech boots, what he got for Christmas, and why he made certain statements as a 9-year-old. Of course, later that same year, CBS went on to make strident and, yes, some ridiculous allegations against Burke, and they were promptly slapped with a $750 million lawsuit. So when this grand juror went on television to spill a bean or two, you can see why caution was warranted in 2016. You can also understand why that grand juror didn't make another peep until 4 years later. Now, before we get to the rest of the grand juror's comments, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button. Also, look out for more coverage on this series on the grand jury in the next couple of episodes. And let's get started.
Little girl, big mystery. Even after nearly 2 years of investigation, the murder of JonBenet Ramsey remained unsolved. It was looking like the killer might never get caught. Until, in late 1998, the wheels of Boulder justice jumped into overdrive.
Grand jurors arrived at the Boulder County Justice Center this morning.
The DA presented the case to a grand jury of 8 women and 4 men.
Police have been pushing for this day for months.
We're at a grand jury stage where the key element is surprise.
No one is talking about what's going on in the courtroom, and we don't expect a lot of information to come out.
Before you were a grand juror, what did you know about the JonBenet Ramsey case?
Very little. I saw that there was a little girl dressed up with, in my opinion, a sexual persona. It disgusted me and I turned off the TV.
The whole jury even took a field trip to the Ramsey home on 15th Street.
In the basement where she was down, it was actually kind of a obscure layout. And you had to go into, you come in the stairwell and you had to go into another room to find the door that was closed. It was a very eerie feeling. Someone being killed here.
Now, what Jonathan Webb seems to be saying here, without being explicit about it, was just how difficult it was for the jurors to find their way to the room where JonBenet was hidden. And what he seems to be saying is, would an intruder really have known where this room was, the wine cellar? And then he describes this eerie feeling being inside that room and saying, well, somebody had been killed here. I don't think that's actually true. I don't think that is where JonBenet was killed. But certainly someone who was no longer alive lay in that room. But now we are about to get down to brass tacks.
Are you sure you want to hear this?
we are dealing not only with the unambiguous report of a grand juror, but his review of the most critical questions of all: who committed these crimes? So let me ask you again, seriously.
Are you sure you want to hear this?
In death.
At least 9 of those jurors felt there was probable cause to believe that that crime occurred.
Was there enough evidence to indict John and Patsy Ramsey of a crime?
Based upon the evidence that was presented, I believe that's correct.
That is already a big difference to what DA Alex Hunter said about insufficient evidence. Listen to his answer. Based upon the evidence that was presented, there was enough evidence to indict John and Patsy Ramsey. And we know that this is self-evidently true because the grand jury collectively voted to indict 4 times over. So clearly they did feel there was enough evidence to indict JonBenet's parents. But here's the pertinent part and the pertinent question.
But if the case went to trial, did he believe that the Ramseys would be convicted?
No,
No doubt.
there's no way that I would be able to say beyond a reasonable doubt this is the person.
There was no smoking gun.
Not to the point of knowing exactly what happened or exactly who was involved in that.
And this is interesting. I wish the question had been more specific, but to become more specific invites likely legal censure. And so when he says there's no way I'd be able to say beyond a reasonable doubt this is the person, it seems to be saying it could be this person or that person. Between the two, it's hard to say which one. And so this is the person who did what, right? And we don't know the answer to that, but let's speculate for a moment. Did Patsy possibly write the ransom note? You might say yes, but can you fairly say that she definitely wrote it beyond a reasonable doubt? The ambidextrous angles, make this a tough case to be certain about. The disguised handwriting as well. In terms of the sexual narrative, can one say one way or the other who did what and what was going on and for how long and what exactly was going on beyond a reasonable doubt? And the same applies to the killing of JonBenet. Even the autopsy report can't commit one way or the other. It doesn't go further than saying her death was the result of one injury associated with another. Now, to me, the broader picture, the more global thing isn't the death of JonBenet more accurately associated with the sexual aspect, right? Not that the one injury is associated with the other in terms of the killing of her, the injuries inflicted when she died, but isn't the killing of JonBenet associated with the sexual aspect? And I think when you start to open that can of worms, then it becomes a different kind of case as well. In any event, in this respect, one can see the lack of legal efficacy in a non-intruder case going to trial, and I guess even an intruder theory case going to trial, how difficult it might be to prosecute.
No way that I would be able to say beyond a reasonable doubt this is the person.
There was no smoking gun.
Not to the point of knowing exactly what happened or exactly who was involved in that.
And then he goes on to point out, if you're the district attorney, if you know that going in, it's a waste of taxpayers' dollars to do it. Now, I could be misinterpreting the juror's words, but let me offer an opinion based on what he said in 2020 and 2021 and see if we can put the pieces of the puzzle together. If there's this scenario of 2 perpetrators, then it could be difficult to say who did what and who was involved between the 2. I mean, if there are 2 perpetrators, one wielding a bat and one the broken paintbrush, then who killed JonBenet? And if you say it's the one wielding the paintbrush, well, how can one absolutely prove it was perpetrator A and not perpetrator B? Do you see the conundrum?
Bingo. It is a pickle, no doubt about it.
Now, I want you to think about the indictments, think about what's in them and what isn't. First of all, no one is being indicted for murder. No one is being indicted for killing JonBenet. Secondly, the indictments are for the far lesser crime of covering up, of possibly hindering an investigation and allegedly failing to protect a child. And so now we're back to the Russ case in terms of legal intertextuality and within the context of someone losing their life. I mean, that's the worst thing that can happen in terms of our human experience. Someone dies, especially for the person dying, it's the worst case scenario, right? And so legally speaking, it's the worst possible situation, but the worst charges that actually came out of everything in terms of that case was an 18-month sentence, barely a slap on the wrist. Now, again, I could be misinterpreting that case, but it seems as if there was a lot of reluctance and fear to prosecute that case in New Mexico, in Santa Fe, and I've been there. I've been to the area where that happened as well. And I think it's fair to say that the New Mexico court who dealt with the case ultimately courted plenty of controversy. And from more than one perspective, I think the way they handled this case, certainly in my opinion, was an absolute disgrace. There was kind of like a whole meltdown that played out on national television. It really was quite disgusting and quite disgraceful. Now, one can only imagine a similar scenario playing out in Boulder. Huge fanfare, big legal stakes, but over fairly piffly charges. Why put yourself out there as a lightning rod for criticism if you could avoid it? If you could avoid an OJ trial, why not?
But in an astonishing turn of events, the prosecutor nullified the findings of his own grand jury, the criminal justice equivalent of, oh, never mind.
Based on the evidence you were presented, do you feel you know who killed JonBenet Ramsey?
I highly suspect I do.
And who do you think that is?
I wish not to answer that question.
And that makes perfect sense. If the case couldn't get a conviction in a proper jury trial, and who would be in a better position to gauge that likelihood? You know, and if the jury himself heard the evidence and didn't think it could reach that higher legal standard, then he'd be perfectly entitled and well advised not to disclose the identity of a killer that couldn't be proved in a court of law. And so he doesn't. Now we can see why Alex Hunter seemed to get cold feet too, right? But in this non-intruder theory scenario that the grand jury was considering, if strangers are excluded, then who on the list of remaining possible suspects are there left that could be potentially JonBenet's killer? And again, think about the question that was posed to John Douglas that we dealt with in the previous analysis. What if we told you there is evidence that 2 people were involved in this crime? Well, which 2 is this question referring to? Well, I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.